This is my true story. I raised my son alone after his mother left when he was 8 years old. I worked 2 jobs to put him through business school and watched him become a millionaire by 35. On Father's Day this year, I arrived at his mansion hoping we could spend time together. Instead, he handed me a mop in front of his laughing friends and told me to clean his washroom. He said I needed to earn my lunch. His colleagues laughed while I stood there humiliated. But what he did not know changed everything. Before I tell you what happened, tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I raised my son completely alone after his mother left us when he was only 8 years old. She walked out one day saying she needed to find herself and that family life was suffocating her. She left me with a young boy who needed his mother, and I had to figure out how to be both parents to him. I worked 2 jobs to make sure we had enough money to live comfortably and to save for his future. I worked days as a manager at a warehouse and nights doing bookkeeping for small businesses. I was exhausted all the time, but I did it because my son needed me. I put him through business school completely debt-free by working those 2 jobs for years and saving every extra dollar I could. I wanted him to graduate without the burden of student loans hanging over him. I wanted him to start his adult life with a clean slate and opportunities I never had. I paid his tuition and his rent and his living expenses for 4 years while he focused on his education. I was proud to do it because I believed I was investing in his future and our future together. I watched him climb the corporate ladder after graduation with pride swelling in my chest every time he told me about a promotion or a raise. He was smart and ambitious, and he knew how to navigate the business world. He started as an analyst, and within a few years he was a manager. Within 10 years, he was a senior executive making 6 figures. By the time he was 35, he was a millionaire with a mansion and expensive cars and all the trappings of success. I believed every sacrifice I had made had been worth it when I saw how successful he had become. All those years of working 2 jobs and being exhausted and missing sleep seemed worthwhile because my son had achieved something remarkable. He had built a life of wealth and comfort that I had never been able to provide for myself. I thought I had done my job as a father by giving him the foundation to succeed. I thought he would always remember what I had sacrificed for him. I never imagined that success would transform my boy into someone I barely recognized. The sweet kid who used to hug me and tell me he loved me disappeared. The young man who used to call me regularly and ask my advice stopped reaching out. The son who had once been grateful for everything I did started treating me like I was an inconvenience. Success changed him in ways I could never have predicted. He became arrogant and cold as his wealth grew. He started talking down to people, including me. He started acting like he was better than everyone else because he had money and status. He surrounded himself with other wealthy people and seemed embarrassed by his modest background. He acted like he had built his success entirely on his own and conveniently forgot about the father who worked 2 jobs to put him through school. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. My son, who I had raised with love and sacrifice, turned into a monster who saw his father as something less than human. He looked at me and saw someone who had not achieved wealth like he had. He saw someone who still worked a regular job and lived in a regular house and drove a regular car. He saw someone who reminded him of where he came from, and he did not like being reminded of his humble origins. He started treating me like hired help instead of his father. When I visited his mansion, he would give me tasks to do. He would ask me to help with things around the house like I was staff. He would speak to me in a tone he would use with a servant, not with the man who raised him. I noticed the change, but I tried to ignore it. I tried to believe that deep down, he was still the boy I raised, and that this cruel person was just a phase. I kept hoping that one day he would remember who he used to be and who I was to him. I kept believing that the son I loved was still in there somewhere beneath all the wealth and arrogance. But with each visit and each interaction, it became clearer that my son was gone and had been replaced by someone who had no respect for me or appreciation for what I had done for him. The cruelty started small with things I tried to excuse as him just being busy or distracted. He started forgetting my birthday year after year. I would wake up on my birthday hoping for a call or a message, and nothing would come. Days later, he might send a quick text saying, sorry he forgot, but he had been swamped at work. He never sent a card or a gift or made any real effort to acknowledge the day. I had never missed his birthday when he was growing up, even when money was tight. But now that he was successful, he could not be bothered to remember mine. He started canceling dinners we had planned at the last minute. I would drive an hour to his city, excited to spend time with him, and he would call when I was almost there saying something came up at work. He would say we needed to reschedule, but then weeks would pass before he would agree to meet again. When we did finally meet, he would spend most of the time on his phone or talking about himself. He never asked about my life or showed any interest in what I was doing. He started speaking to me like I was staff instead of family. His tone when talking to me was dismissive and condescending. He would interrupt me mid-sentence or talk over me like what I was saying did not matter. He would correct me or contradict me in front of other people to make himself look smarter. He treated me like I was someone who worked for him, not like I was his father, who had sacrificed everything for him. The humiliation escalated when I started visiting his mansion for holidays or special occasions. He would make me serve drinks to his guests like I was hired help. He would hand me a tray and tell me to walk around offering wine or appetizers to his friends and colleagues. I would stand there holding a tray while wealthy people took glasses without even looking at me or thanking me. My son would introduce me as his father, but then immediately give me tasks that made it clear I was there to serve, not to socialize. He made me eat in the kitchen while his friends and guests dined in his formal dining room. He said there was not enough room at the table for everyone, so I should eat in the kitchen. But the table was huge, and there was plenty of room. He just did not want me sitting with his important guests. So I would eat alone in the kitchen like I was the help while I listened to laughter and conversation from the other room. The humiliation of it was crushing. When I stayed overnight at his house, he made me sleep in the basement guest room instead of one of the many nice bedrooms upstairs. The basement room was cold and damp and poorly furnished. It felt like a storage room that had been converted into a bedroom as an afterthought. Meanwhile, his house had 5 beautiful bedrooms upstairs that sat empty. He put me in the basement because he did not want me in the nice part of his house where I might be seen by guests or neighbors. Each humiliation carved deeper wounds into my heart and my sense of self-worth. Every time he treated me like hired help, I felt smaller and less valuable. Every time he made me serve his guests or eat alone or sleep in the basement, I felt the pain of being rejected by my own son. The son I had raised and sacrificed for was treating me worse than he would treat a stranger. But I stayed silent through all of it. I did not confront him or tell him how much he was hurting me. I made excuses for his behavior and told myself he was just stressed from work or going through a difficult time. I kept hoping that if I was patient and understanding, he would eventually remember who I was and start treating me better. I kept hoping the son I raised still existed somewhere beneath the wealth and the arrogance and the cruelty. I was wrong, but I did not know it yet. This Father's Day, I arrived at my son's mansion with hope in my heart that maybe today would be different. Father's Day was supposed to be a day when children honored their fathers and showed appreciation for everything their fathers had done. I thought maybe on this day my son would remember who I was and what I had sacrificed for him. I thought maybe he would treat me with kindness and respect for once. I drove to his house feeling cautiously optimistic that we could have a good day together. When I arrived, I saw that he was hosting a party at his mansion. There were expensive cars parked in his driveway, and I could hear music and voices coming from inside. He had not told me he was having a party. He had just told me to come over for Father's Day. I walked in and saw dozens of people I did not know standing around drinking and talking. They were his colleagues and business associates, all dressed in expensive clothes and holding glasses of wine. My son saw me come in, and he walked over. I smiled and wished him a good afternoon, hoping he would acknowledge that it was Father's Day and maybe thank me for coming. Instead, he looked at me with an expression that was cold and annoyed. He did not hug me or greet me warmly. He acted like I was an interruption to his party. I felt my hope starting to fade as I realized this day was not going to be what I wanted it to be. Then he did something that broke me completely. He walked to a closet and pulled out a mop and a bucket. He handed them to me in front of all his laughing colleagues who were watching this interaction. He said, "Clean my washroom, old man, it is disgusting." He said I needed to earn my lunch if I wanted to eat at his party. His voice was loud enough that everyone nearby could hear him. He was making a spectacle of humiliating his father in front of his wealthy friends. His colleagues started laughing at his comment. They thought it was funny that he was making his elderly father clean his bathroom. They laughed like it was a joke, and my son laughed with them, enjoying the attention and the cruelty. I stood there holding the mop and bucket while people around me laughed and pointed. My hands started trembling, and I felt my face getting hot with shame and anger. I looked at my son and saw no remorse or recognition of how cruel he was being. He was smiling and enjoying the moment. He had just handed his father a mop on Father's Day and told him to clean a toilet to earn his lunch. The son I had worked 2 jobs to raise. The son I had put through business school debt-free. The son I had sacrificed everything for. He was treating me like garbage in front of strangers and laughing about it. Something inside me shattered in that moment. All the hope I had been holding on to that my son might change or remember who I was died instantly. All the excuses I had been making for his behavior dissolved. All the patience I had been showing evaporated. I realized my son was not going through a phase or dealing with stress. He was genuinely cruel, and he had no respect for me whatsoever. But something else happened in that moment too. The shattered pieces of my hope reformed into something cold and hard like steel. I felt a clarity I had not felt in years. I realized I was done accepting his cruelty. I was done hoping he would change. I was done protecting him from consequences. I had been quiet for too long, and it was time to stop being quiet. I stood there holding that mop while people laughed, and I made a decision that would change everything. My son had no idea what he had just set in motion. He had no idea that the father he was humiliating had been watching him very carefully for a long time. He had no idea that I knew things about him that could destroy his entire life. He thought I was just a pathetic old man he could mock. He was about to learn how wrong he was. What my son did not know was that for the past 2 years, I had been watching him very carefully and documenting everything I saw and heard. I had not been visiting his house just to spend time with a son who treated me terribly. I had been visiting because I suspected something was wrong with how he was making his money. I had noticed things that did not add up. I had heard things that sounded illegal. And I had decided to investigate quietly while playing the role of the submissive father. I lived in his house during my visits with my eyes open and my mouth shut. I watched and listened and took mental notes of everything. When he made me serve drinks to his guests, I listened to their conversations. When he made me clean or do tasks around his house, I paid attention to what was left out on desks and tables. When he talked on the phone, I heard things he thought I was too old or too irrelevant to understand or remember. I collected evidence of crimes he committed with such arrogance that he never thought to hide them from me. He truly believed I was just a harmless old man who was too simple to understand his business dealings. He thought because I had worked regular jobs my whole life, I could not possibly comprehend the complex world of corporate finance and business. He underestimated me completely, and that was his biggest mistake. He discussed tax evasion schemes openly at dinner tables while I sat nearby. He would have conversations with his accountant or his lawyer about moving money through shell companies to avoid paying taxes. He would laugh about how the government would never figure out what he was doing. He would brag about the millions he was saving by hiding income in offshore accounts. He said all of this in front of me because he thought I was too stupid to understand what he was talking about. He left company documents carelessly on his desk in his home office. When I was in his house, I would sometimes go into his office when he was not there. I would look at the papers on his desk, and I would take photos of them with my phone. I took pictures of emails and financial statements and contracts. I took pictures of anything that looked important or suspicious. I built a massive digital file of documents that showed exactly what he was doing. He conducted phone calls about illegal deals while I was in nearby rooms supposedly cleaning or doing tasks. He would talk to business partners about selling confidential information or stealing from his company. He would close deals over the phone that involved fraud or insider trading. He thought because I was in another room or because I was old that I was not paying attention. But I heard everything and I remembered everything. I gathered evidence for 24 months without him having any idea what I was doing. Every visit to his house was an opportunity to learn more about his crimes. Every time he humiliated me was a chance to see documents or hear conversations he thought I was too insignificant to notice. He was so focused on treating me like garbage that he never considered I might be intelligent enough to understand what he was doing wrong. I documented everything methodically and carefully. I kept detailed notes with dates and times. I saved photos and recordings. I organized everything into folders on my computer. I built a case against my own son because I knew what he was doing was not just wrong morally, but illegal criminally. I knew he was stealing and cheating and breaking laws. And I knew eventually I would need to decide what to do with all this information. I had been waiting for the right moment to act. I had been waiting to see if my son would show any remorse or change his behavior. I had been giving him chances to be better. But on Father's Day, when he handed me that mop and told me to clean his washroom in front of his laughing colleagues, I knew the time for waiting was over. He had shown me exactly who he was and what he thought of me. Now I was going to show him what happens when you underestimate your father. My son's millions were not earned through talent or hard work like I had once believed. Everything he had was built on corruption and crime. I had spent 2 years uncovering the truth about how he made his money, and it was ugly and illegal. The mansion and the cars and the wealth he was so proud of were all purchased with money he had stolen or earned through fraud. His entire life was a lie built on criminal activity. He had been leaking confidential documents from his company to competitors for money. His company was a major player in their industry, and they had proprietary information that was extremely valuable. My son had access to this information because of his executive position. He was stealing documents and files and selling them to competing companies for massive payouts. I had seen emails where he negotiated these deals. I had photos of bank transfers showing payments of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The biggest deal I uncovered was one where he sold a complete set of product development plans to a competitor for $5 million. The plans included years of research and development that his company had invested tens of millions to create. He copied everything and handed it over to a rival company in exchange for a wire transfer to an offshore account. I had documentation of the entire transaction, including emails and bank records. He was evading taxes through shell companies and offshore accounts. He had set up a network of fake businesses in different countries. Money would flow through these companies in complicated patterns designed to hide his income from tax authorities. He would report a modest income to the government while actually earning millions that he never paid taxes on. I had found spreadsheets on his computer showing the real numbers versus what he reported on his tax returns. He was embezzling funds from his own company. He had figured out ways to approve fake invoices and payments that actually went to accounts he controlled. He would create fake vendors or consultants and pay them for services that were never provided. The money would end up in his offshore accounts. Over several years, he had stolen millions from his company this way. I had photos of documents showing the fraudulent transactions. His luxury cars and his mansion and everything he owned were purchased with stolen money. The lifestyle he was so arrogant about was financed by corporate espionage and tax fraud and embezzlement. Every time he looked down on me for being modest and working a regular job, he was doing it while sitting on a throne built from crime. Every time he humiliated me, he was forgetting that his wealth came from illegal activity, not from legitimate success. I had all the evidence organized and ready. I had bank statements showing suspicious transfers. I had emails discussing illegal deals. I had documents proving he sold company secrets. I had his personal financial records showing unreported income. I had recordings of phone calls where he discussed his schemes. I had everything needed to prove he was a criminal who deserved to be prosecuted. The authorities would have everything they needed to build a case against him. His company would have proof that he betrayed them and stole from them. The tax agency would have documentation of his evasion schemes. Federal prosecutors would have evidence of wire fraud and money laundering. His entire criminal empire was documented in files I had been carefully building for 2 years. I had been sitting on this information wondering what to do with it. Part of me had hoped I would never need to use it. Part of me had hoped my son would change or show remorse or start treating me better. I had been giving him chances to be a better person, but he had thrown those chances away by continuing to treat me with cruelty and contempt. Now standing in his mansion on Father's Day, holding a mop while his friends laughed at me, I knew exactly what I was going to do with all the evidence I had gathered. My son thought I was just a pathetic old man who he could humiliate. He thought I was powerless and irrelevant. He had no idea I had the power to destroy everything he had built. He had no idea his crimes were about to be exposed. He had no idea his life was about to collapse. But he was about to learn. Still holding that mop in my trembling hands with people around me laughing, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My son was standing a few feet away, smiling and enjoying the humiliation he had just inflicted on me. His colleagues were still chuckling and making jokes about the old man with the mop. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. My son thought this was just another day of treating his father like garbage. He was wrong. I had saved the phone number of his company's CEO months ago when I first started gathering evidence. I had found the number on documents in my son's office. I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. That moment was now. I unlocked my phone and found the contact and pressed call. The phone rang while everyone around me continued talking and laughing. They did not notice or care that I was making a phone call. The CEO answered after 3 rings. He said hello in a professional voice. I said, "Sir, this is the father of one of your senior executives." I gave him my son's name. There was a pause on the other end. The CEO said, "Okay, how can I help you?" His tone was curious but cautious. I took a deep breath and said, "I have 2 years of documented evidence showing that your executive has been selling your company's secrets to competitors." I said I have proof he received $5 million for leaking confidential product development plans. The room around me had started to go quiet as people noticed I was on a phone call and speaking loudly. My son looked over at me with confusion and annoyance. He could not hear what I was saying, but he could see I was having a serious conversation. I continued talking to the CEO. I said I have evidence of tax evasion through shell companies and offshore accounts. I said I have documentation of embezzlement from your company through fake invoices and fraudulent payments. I said I am ready to turn everything over to authorities and to your legal team immediately. The CEO's voice changed completely. He said, "Where are you right now?" I told him I was at my son's house. He said, "Do not go anywhere and do not let your son leave." He said he was sending people immediately and that I should secure any evidence I had with me. I said I had flash drives with copies of everything in my car. I said I had been gathering this evidence for 2 years and it was comprehensive and detailed. The CEO said he was on his way personally with lawyers and that law enforcement would be contacted. My son had walked over to me by this point. His face was starting to show concern as he realized something serious was happening. He said, "What are you doing and who are you talking to?" His colleagues had stopped laughing and were watching with confusion. I looked at my son and said, "I am talking to your CEO, and I am telling him about all the crimes you have committed." I said I am giving him evidence that will destroy your career and send you to prison. My son's face drained of all color. He looked at me with shock and disbelief. He said, "What are you talking about?" and his voice cracked. I said, "I know about the $5 million you got for selling company secrets." I said, "I know about the offshore accounts and the tax evasion." I said, "I know about the embezzlement and the fraud." I said, "I have been documenting everything for 2 years while you treated me like garbage and made me clean your floors." He tried to grab the phone from my hand, but I stepped back. I told the CEO I needed to go, but that I would wait for him to arrive. The CEO said he would be there in 30 minutes with a team of lawyers. I hung up the phone and looked at my son. His face showed pure panic now. His colleagues were standing around looking confused and uncomfortable. The party atmosphere had completely disappeared. Everyone could sense something terrible was happening, but they did not understand what yet. My son said, "You are lying, and you do not have anything." But his voice showed he knew I was telling the truth. He knew I had been in his house many times. He knew I could have seen things. He was starting to realize he had made a catastrophic mistake by underestimating his father. My son's face showed complete terror as he fully understood what was happening. He said, "Dad, please," and his voice was shaking. He said, "We can talk about this and work something out." He was trying to negotiate or manipulate me into stopping what I had started, but it was too late. The call had been made. The CEO was on his way. There was no going back now. I had crossed the point of no return, and I felt no regret about it. I walked past him toward my car where I had the evidence stored. He followed me asking questions and making desperate pleas. He said I was making a terrible mistake and that I did not understand what I was doing. He said if I turned over that evidence, I would destroy his life. I turned to him and said, "You destroyed our relationship when you handed me a mop on Father's Day." I said you destroyed any loyalty I might have had when you treated me like hired help for years. I said this was his own fault. I opened my car trunk and pulled out a large folder and several flash drives that I had prepared months ago. The folder was thick with printed documents. I had organized everything carefully, knowing that eventually I would need to present it to someone. I had bank statements showing offshore transfers. I had emails discussing illegal deals. I had photos of confidential documents he had stolen. I had recordings of phone calls. I had spreadsheets showing unreported income. I had everything needed to prove every crime he had committed. I walked back into his house carrying the folder and the flash drives. His colleagues were still standing around watching this scene unfold. They did not know what was in the folder, but they could tell it was serious. My son followed me inside, begging me to stop. He said he would do anything if I would just not give that information to his CEO. He said he would treat me better and respect me and make up for everything. His promises meant nothing because they were only coming now that he faced consequences. I laid the evidence across his marble kitchen countertop so everyone could see. I opened the folder and spread out printed emails and bank statements and documents. I held up one page and said, "This is an email where he negotiated the sale of confidential product plans for $5 million. I held up another page and said, "This is a bank statement showing the wire transfer from the competitor." I held up another and said, "This is a spreadsheet showing his real income versus what he reported to the IRS." His colleagues standing nearby could now see proof of his crimes laid out in front of them. They could see emails with his name on them. They could see bank transfers to his accounts. They could see documents proving he had betrayed his company and stolen from them. Some of his colleagues started backing away and leaving. They did not want to be associated with what was happening. They did not want to be witnesses to his criminal activity being exposed. My son tried to grab the papers off the counter, but I blocked him. I said, "You wanted me to clean your house." I said, "So I am cleaning it up properly." I said, "I am cleaning up all your crimes and your corruption." I said, "I am cleaning up the mess you made of your life." He looked at me with tears starting to form in his eyes. He realized I was serious and that I was not going to stop. His phone started ringing. It was probably his lawyer or someone from his company who had heard what was happening. He did not answer it. He just stood there staring at the evidence spread across his counter. He was watching his entire life fall apart in real time. Everything he had built through crime and corruption was about to be taken away. The mansion and the cars and the money and the status were all about to disappear. I stood there calmly waiting for the CEO and the authorities to arrive. I had no doubt and no hesitation. I had made the right decision. My son had pushed me too far, and now he was going to pay the price for his arrogance and his cruelty and his crimes. Within an hour, the mansion was filled with people who were there to investigate my son. The CEO arrived first in a black car with 2 lawyers. They walked in, and I handed them the folder and the flash drives immediately. The CEO's face was dark with rage as he looked through the documents. He said he could not believe one of his most trusted executives had been betraying the company for years. He said the damages from the leaked information were in the tens of millions. He said my son had destroyed proprietary research that took years to develop. Federal agents arrived shortly after. I had given the CEO permission to contact law enforcement, and he had called them immediately. The agents were from multiple agencies because my son's crimes crossed several jurisdictions. There were agents investigating corporate espionage. There were agents from the tax division investigating fraud and evasion. There were agents investigating wire fraud and money laundering. They all descended on the mansion with badges and briefcases ready to collect evidence. Corporate lawyers from my son's company arrived with boxes and equipment to document everything. They set up in his dining room and started going through the evidence I had provided. They photographed every document. They copied every file from the flash drives onto their secure systems. They made detailed notes about dates and transactions and amounts. They were building a comprehensive case against my son that would be used in both criminal and civil proceedings. The CEO sat down with me personally and went through everything I had documented. I explained how I had gathered the evidence over 2 years. I told him about the conversations I had overheard, and the documents I had photographed, and the recordings I had made. I walked him through the major crimes, including the $5 million sale of product development plans. I showed him the complete paper trail of offshore accounts and shell companies used for tax evasion. The list of charges grew as agents and lawyers reviewed all the evidence. Tax evasion for hiding millions in unreported income over several years. Corporate espionage for stealing and selling confidential company information. Wire fraud for the electronic transfer of stolen funds. Money laundering for moving illegal proceeds through shell companies. Embezzlement for stealing from his company through fake invoices. Each crime carried serious prison time, and the charges kept adding up. Federal agents approached my son and told him he was being placed under arrest. They read him his rights while his remaining party guests watched in horror. Some people were recording the scene on their phones. My son's arrest was being documented and would probably be shared online within hours. His public humiliation was complete. The successful executive who had mocked his father was now being handcuffed by federal agents in his own mansion. They placed handcuffs on his wrists and led him toward the door. He was crying now and saying this could not be happening. He kept looking at me with an expression that mixed betrayal and disbelief. He could not understand how his pathetic old father had taken him down so completely. He had underestimated me, and it had cost him everything. The agents put him in the back of their car and drove away with him to be processed and charged formally. His party guests scattered like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Nobody wanted to be associated with him anymore. His colleagues, who had laughed when he handed me a mop, were now running away trying to distance themselves from the scandal. His wealthy friends who had enjoyed his hospitality were abandoning him immediately. Within an hour, the mansion was empty, except for investigators and lawyers going through his property looking for additional evidence. The CEO thanked me personally for coming forward with the evidence. He said I had done the right thing, even though it must have been difficult to turn in my own son. He said the company would make sure I was protected and that any legal fees I incurred would be covered. He said my courage in exposing corporate espionage had potentially saved the company from even greater losses. I told him I did not do it for thanks or reward. I did it because my son had become a criminal and I could not protect him anymore. My son's assets were frozen immediately pending investigation into the source of his wealth. Federal prosecutors moved quickly to ensure he could not hide or move any money while the case was being built. The mansion was seized as proceeds from criminal activity. A judge signed an order placing the property under government control until the case was resolved. My son was not allowed to return to his house or access anything inside it. Everything he owned was now evidence in a criminal case. His expensive cars were impounded by authorities. The Mercedes and the BMW and the other luxury vehicles he had been so proud of were towed away to secure lots. Each car was being evaluated to determine if it had been purchased with illegal funds. The government would eventually sell them and use the proceeds to compensate victims of his crimes. The cars that he had used to show off his success were gone within days. His bank accounts were locked completely. He had no access to any money, whether it was in domestic accounts or offshore accounts. Federal investigators had traced every dollar and frozen everything. He went from being a millionaire to having zero access to funds overnight. He could not pay for lawyers or bond or basic living expenses. His wealth had disappeared because it was all evidence of criminal activity. The $5 million he received from selling company secrets was traced and recovered by investigators. They followed the wire transfers from the competing company through multiple accounts and jurisdictions. They worked with international authorities to freeze the funds and begin repatriation. The money he had been paid for his betrayal was being returned to his company. He would not keep a single dollar of it. His reputation was destroyed across the entire industry. News of his arrest and the charges against him spread quickly through business networks. Former colleagues and competitors all learned that he had been stealing and selling secrets. His name became associated with corporate espionage and fraud. No legitimate company would ever hire him again. His career was over permanently. Even if he got out of prison eventually, he would be unemployable in any serious business role. He screamed at me through tears when they allowed him one phone call from jail. He called me instead of a lawyer because he was desperate to understand why I had done this to him. He said, "I am your son," and his voice was breaking. He said, "How could you do this to your own son?" He was crying and begging me to somehow undo what I had set in motion. He wanted me to recant or claim the evidence was fake. He wanted me to save him from the consequences of his own actions. I replied calmly, without raising my voice. I said, "You stopped being my son when you handed me a mop on Father's Day. I said you stopped being my son when you made me serve your guests and eat in the kitchen and sleep in the basement. I said you stopped being my son when you treated me like hired help while you got rich through crime. I said you became a criminal I happened to raise and I could not protect a criminal anymore." I told him I had given him 2 years of chances to change. I said I had watched and documented everything hoping he would show some decency or remorse. I said I had waited hoping the son I raised was still in there somewhere. But he had shown me repeatedly that person was gone. He had chosen wealth and status over family and morality. He had chosen cruelty over kindness. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. He screamed that I had destroyed his life. I said, "No, you destroyed your own life by committing crimes and treating people terribly." I said I just stopped protecting you from the truth. I said I stopped covering for you and pretending everything was fine. I said you built your life on corruption and arrogance, and it was always going to collapse eventually. All I did was make sure justice happened. The phone call ended with him crying and cursing me. I hung up and felt nothing but relief. I had done what needed to be done. My son had become someone I did not recognize and did not want to protect. He had earned everything that was happening to him through his own terrible choices. My son is serving 12 years in federal prison for corporate espionage and tax evasion. The judge sentenced him harshly because of the massive scale of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse during the trial. He tried to blame me during his court proceedings, saying I had entrapped him or manipulated evidence. But the documentation was ironclad and showed clearly what he had done. The jury convicted him on every count after deliberating for less than a day. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I live peacefully now, far from his world of corruption and cruelty. I moved to a small town in a different state where nobody knows my history or my story. I have a modest house and a quiet life. I spend my days reading and working in my garden and volunteering at a local community center. I have found peace that I never had when I was being humiliated by my son. My life is simple, but it is mine, and nobody treats me with contempt anymore. People ask me sometimes how I could destroy my own son's life. Neighbors or acquaintances who learn bits of my story express shock that a father would turn in his child. They say blood is thicker than water and family should protect each other no matter what. They say I should have tried to help him or cover for him instead of sending him to prison. They do not understand, and I have stopped trying to explain it to most people. The truth is, I did not destroy my son. He destroyed himself with his arrogance and his crimes. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his choices. For years, I had been silent while he built an empire on corruption. I had watched him become wealthy through theft and fraud. I had seen him betray his company and cheat the government and hurt innocent people. And I had said nothing because he was my son and I kept hoping he would change. But hoping someone will change while they continue doing terrible things is not love. It is enabling. It is allowing harm to continue because you care more about the relationship than about what is right. I realized on Father's Day when he handed me that mop that I had been enabling a criminal by staying silent. I had been protecting someone who deserved to face justice. And I decided I could not do that anymore. I started protecting the truth instead of protecting him. I gave authorities the evidence they needed to stop his criminal activity. I helped his company recover stolen information and funds. I assisted federal prosecutors in building their case. I testified at his trial about what I had witnessed and documented. I chose justice over loyalty to someone who had shown me no loyalty or love. My son gave me a mop on Father's Day and told me to clean his washroom in front of his laughing friends. He thought he was humiliating a weak old man who had no power. He thought I was pathetic and irrelevant. He had no idea that I had been building a case against him for 2 years. He had no idea that the father he mocked was about to bring down his entire fraudulent empire. So instead of cleaning his washroom, I called his CEO and gave them 2 years of evidence proving he had stolen $5 million and committed multiple federal crimes. I cleaned up something much bigger than a dirty bathroom. I cleaned up his entire criminal life. I exposed the corruption and the fraud and the theft that had funded his mansion and his cars and his arrogant lifestyle. He is in prison now, serving 12 years and facing additional civil lawsuits from his company. He lost everything, just like I lost everything when I was humiliated on Father's Day. But the difference is, he lost things he stole and earned through crime. I lost a son who had already been gone for years, replaced by a cruel stranger. Some messes require more than a mop to clean. Some messes require the courage to tell the truth, no matter how painful. I had that courage, and I used it. I have no regrets about the choice I made. My son needed justice, not protection. And justice is what he got.